Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast. I want to explore a concept today, the concept of what's in a name. You know, there's something I did not share with you, but earlier this year, in January, my amazing wife had her conversion. She came out of the mikvah, no longer Shana, but Elisheva. And as I was there at the Beis Din, I said, I would like to change my name as well. And I asked them if I could add a middle name to Daniel and add the name Zavulun, because I've always been drawn to that character in the Torah that supported his brother Ishkar in his Torah studies. And I always felt, as being part of Torch, that was something I took great pride in and something I wanted to do better. So I asked Rabbi Yacobian at the time, will that change my mazel and my ability to fulfill that mission in a much bigger way? And he said, yes, indeed it will. So I changed my name. And I want to approach this topic with the framework I sort of presented on the episode I did, The Power of Speech, with Rabbi Yacobian. And I asked him to come on and talk about the impact of saying our blessings in the Hebrew language on the world around us. And I start off by talking about, if you look at the construct of the world, according to the Ramchal, that the binary code of the world is God's revelation or concealment of himself. And the programming code is the Hebrew language, and how us as speaking beings are the other outside of our infinite internal creator that can contribute to the world around us, either building it up and making it more holy or tearing it down. Something Rabbi Cohen taught me was that the four-letter name of Hashem represents thought manifest, meaning that the Yud represents the initial idea of creation. The second letter, Hey, represents the world of formation. The Vav represents those ideas, that thought, that will of creation coming into the second Hey, which is the physical world. And likewise, mankind is structured in the name of that four-letter name of Hashem. The Yud is our head, it's our mind, it's our consciousness that houses our neshama. The first Hey is our arms. The Vav is our torso, and the second Hey is our legs. And it represents that we, as in the image of God, have been empowered as his co-creators to manifest thought in this world as well. But I want to get to how all that fits into situations you see in the Torah, like where Abraham, Sarah, Yehoshua, all of them were given these changes to their names to reflect their change in their mission, which is why I did it, but I wanted to explore it more deeply. So I asked Rabbi Cotlar, who I had on before, to come on and really delve into this subject with us. I'm sure he is going to thought manifest some incredible ideas for us and help bring some clarity around what is in a name.
Welcome to the Shema podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Rabbi Cotlar, I know you don't like to go by Rabbi, but you're my teacher, you're my rabbi, but I will call you Daniel, if that makes you more comfortable, which is a good name. I like that name. Help us understand this, because it's sort of confusing, because one of the concepts I've always heard in Torah is that you have, like, we're not supposed to look at astrology, right? You see the rest of where they look at astrology, they see how that governs their future, and they try to use that. But God tells us we're above that. We connect directly to the Almighty, that whatever may be a certain course of action by fulfilling Torah mitzvot, that we go to a more lofty level, but then reconcile that with how, when these names are changed of Abraham, Sarah, Yehoshua, things you've seen throughout history, why that makes a difference.
Well, that's such a broad topic. I have to say that, thank you for having me on. The idea of words having real meaning in the building of the universe that we have is a favorite topic of mine. It's something that I'm always drawn to. I think it's a combination of things. It's like the truth behind the truth, what we see. And it's also maybe because of my background in tech and how I look for, I remember the first time that I was involved in anything software related, and I could actually write some, either I did it or I helped somebody else write some code and see something happen. And it was remarkable. And the idea of letters and ideas creating something real that actually has a real world implication is exciting. And to have this be built into the fabric of the universe is just really, I'm sure it's come up a lot on your podcast, and it's exciting.
Well, for one, that prophecy in the Zohar about the second flood and the innovation of technology, I've read things from back at the turn of the last century about how we would discover things that would help us understand the deeper meaning of Torah, the Kabbalah.
Indeed. And I think a lot of the metaphors so forgive me if I keep going back to software, and I know you brought it up earlier, because it's such a great metaphor. It's a modern metaphor, the last 30 years, and it helps articulate many of the things much better than some of the older ones, at least to me.
Yeah.
Many of the concepts that we're going to talk about, you have it in of course, they've been in, because they're truth, they'll be in Yiddishkeit and Judaism from the beginning, in the Torah from the beginning. But they've always been hidden. You have the Sefer Yetzirah, the ancient book that is ascribed to Adam Arishon, to Adam. And then you've got the book of Zohar, times of Shimon Bar Yochai. But they come out in more modern times, in the 1500s, you have the Arizal, the Ari. And then my exposure mostly through the works of Hasidus and Chabad Hasidus in particular. And that would be, for example, the foundational book of Tanya and Shar HaYichud, the Gate of Unity of the Rabbi Shner Zalman of Ladi. So, and then expanded upon by all the other Rebbes who came after him.
Okay.
So, back to your to get into the idea of name and changing names. Why do we have to change the name? Well, you can look in the Parsha and you can find this is just throughout the whole thing. Throughout the entire Torah, you have story after story about how a name was right for the first time, but it wasn't right for the eventual evolution of a person. Sarai, Abraham's wife, Sarai couldn't have children. Sarai means my princess. She was incubating as kind of a more internal person, and then ready to come out into the world and influence more broadly. Her name was changed to Sarah, and then she had a child.
And which means?
It means princess or leader.
Okay. It went from being my princess to...
the broader use of the term, without the suffix meaning mine.
Okay. So the princess to many.
Yes. Okay. Similarly, Avram, which in the books of Hasidus is interpreted to be a shorthand for Avram, meaning lofty father. And according to Kabbalah, father refers to wisdom. It's our chachma. It's the first step of the top of the idealized human. And he had the idea of monotheism and ideas that would change the world, but it was in a state of, it was conceptual. But to then become Avraham, which turns into Av Hamon Goyim, which means father of many nations. That is a journey, and that's the journey of Lech Lecha, that parsha, which means go out into the world. So Avraham's name is changed, Sarai's name is changed. And then they have children, and their mazel changes as a result of that.
Right. Explain a little bit about the mazel.
The word is used in a lot of, and colloquially we say mazel tov.
Right.
And we say, well, you have good mazel or you had bad mazel. And so we use it almost interchangeably with luck. There's a line in Zohar that says, there's not a blade of grass that doesn't have a mazel on it saying grow.
Okay.
Like striking the whip almost, or saying grow.
Right.
It's the spiritual version of something. It's up the chain of devolution down from spiritual to physical, from concept to reality. It's the higher version of something. And in the story of Daniel, there's a part where there's a very scary image and like an awe-inspiring image. And the Talmud discussed how they're all taken aback. This is Daniel and Hanan, Mishael, and Azariah, three other students.
Okay.
They're all awestruck, but it says Daniel saw it, but they didn't see it. So if they didn't see it, then why were they awestruck? Because they didn't see it, but their mazel saw it. That's what it says in the Gemara. Okay. Their mazel. The higher, the part of you, if you imagine your neshama being an iceberg, but upside down, and only a little part of us is down here manifest. And so Mazel is a more spiritual, up the chain version. Like it's if we were shadows on the wall, then it's the physical object that's making the shadow.
Right. Okay.
So you're redirecting. By changing your identity, you're redirecting the pathways of flow of energy and things into your life. I mean, then it goes on. Every single tribe, every Shevet, as they're being named, gives the reason. Their mother or their father gives the reason of why they're being named that. Reuven, Shimon, every single one. And obviously, names have meaning. And then you have throughout history, the two big protagonists. Throughout Jewish history, you have two kingdoms, the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Yosef, which are two of the Shvatim, two of the tribes. Their names themselves give you an indication of really, this is not a battle of just, it's a swinging back and forth between two important ideas within our soul. Each one of us has them, and sometimes we are more like one or more like the other. Yehuda being submission and Haida, thanks, gratitude, but more specifically, we are called Yehudim, Jews,
right?
And that's what we're called in the story of Purim, for example. That just the Yehudim. Yehuda means we acknowledge. It's not about you. It's about submitting to a higher purpose. That's the Yehuda. And then Yosef means flourishing, and it's about what can I do? What amazing things can I do in the world? Can grow, and the kingdoms reflected that big difference. Yehuda, as a person, was a shepherd, and Yosef was a king involved in changing the world. And Yehuda was reaching spiritual heights on his own.
Right. So is the idea here that both those are necessary components that we're trying to harness as a Jew today, to acknowledge where everything comes from, but to allow them to have our role in allowing it to flourish in this world?
Right. And really, we read this Haftarah during the week when Yehuda approaches Yosef, when he thinks he's just the leader of Egypt, and he approaches him to challenge him. And we read the Haftarah afterwards, which always has a tie to the Parsha. The Haftarah talks about one day the kingdom will be united, which is the bringing together of both of these tendencies. When do you really accomplish one is with the other, and vice versa. I was just bringing it as an example of the meaning of names, the importance of names, the destiny that comes with names. Finally, I think one is Yaakov and Yisrael, and that's the father of all the Jewish people. What's interesting about that is in the case of some of the name changes, like Avraham and Sarai and Yehoshua from Hosea, Joshua, and many others, once somebody's name changes, the name changes.
Right, but good point. Like sometimes Yaakov is Yaakov, and sometimes he's Israel.
Yeah. Because we are constantly swinging between our Yaakov and our Yisrael, and both are important. It wasn't that we left Avraham was a stepping stone to get to Avraham, and now we can be Avraham. But in the case of Yaakov and Yisrael, this is something that happens in our life. Kind of like during the week we're Yaakov,
right?
Where the struggle. Akev means holding onto the heel. And then on Shabbos we are Yisrael, leading. So during the week we're discharging, and then on Shabbos we're recharging. And then you have that in life and holidays versus the rest of the thing, or even the morning when you're morning prayers where Yisrael, and then during the day we're Yaakov.
What do those names mean actually, Yaakov and Yisrael?
Yaakov connects with the word Akev, meaning heel, which is down and the most engaging in the most mundane struggles, and holding on to the material world and engaging within it. And Yisrael, there's an acronym, how it connects to the Torah, Yeshish and Riba Osias Patera, Latara. But there's another, but more broadly, the angel who fights with him, he gives him a name and he explains it. He says, because you fought with angels and have won. Yisrael means a leader over Sar-El, over powers.
Okay.
So it's about us as not in a battle, but in a state of peace as a leader, and connecting to what's above us, not connecting to what's below us and struggling.
Okay, because we're down in this world, we're struggling with the mundane, but our task as Jews, as Israel, is to struggle with bring holiness into those mundane affairs.
Right, exactly. So I mean, So to answer back to that question, I think I can't. I'm not sure this is going to be a sufficient answer for it. But the idea of a mazel and the idea of a changing of a name, and there's all these stories. I mean, I have relatives who've changed their names for things, and thank God, have recovered from an illness. It doesn't always happen. I have other stories. So it's, but it's you change the name to bring another pathway. It's not only psychological, but I think there is a psychological element as well. Who do you identify as? One of the things we have to remember is a name is not your neshama, it's not your soul. The soul is infinite. The name is it's a soul body superstate. It's this particular instance of your soul body. It's so that is what's the name, and we can give it another name to bring in different elements of this infinite soul as needed.
Right. Okay. Because we always have that opportunity to live in this world many times. I know just for myself, being a slow learner and a bad student, that I probably have maxed out every opportunity possible. So I've been here before. But each time someone's in this world, they have a different mission. I've heard that, I've read from the Arizal that Moshe's first incarnation here was Noach. He had that mission, but I guess they always criticize Noach as not having enough emunah as he should have, because he didn't get into the ark until it started raining. And then that same neshama comes in as Moshe, and which, by the way, is the word Moshe means.
She also another case of where the name is explored and described, and the reason for it right in the text. Yeah. She says, "I named you Moshe." And that's the name we call him by, not Tuvia, not Yukasil, which are names that we ascribe, the Medrash ascribes to Moshe, but Moshe. Why? Because I drew you out of the water. The Kabbalah says, and this is from brought in the book Torah from earlier sources, that when it refers to Moshe being drawn out of the water, it's a very high soul that is from the water, where water would be the hidden worlds and the land is the revealed world. It's metaphor. There was almost like a pre-world that contains these very high souls. Now, we all source ourselves from there, but there are souls that, even in our world, still identify, still connect, still are cognizant of the hidden world. And that's the meaning of Moshe.
Okay, so it is a name that reflects what our neshama's specific task is.
For that reason, that's why the Gemara says that when we name our children, we're kind of assigning a destiny, and it requires prophecy, and we have that prophecy. It's the 60th. I think you mentioned this on a previous podcast. We have a little shard of prophecy coming down, helping us. I heard a story. I haven't been able to find the source of it. That one Purim, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there was a Purim Farbrengen, which means get together, and people were saying L'chaim, and he went around the table telling them the meaning of their, almost their future on the basis of their name. That would be amazing to have been there. I wish I was.
So one of the things I just started incorporating into the Shemona Esrei was at the very end, going back and reading those verses for Danielle and for Zevulun. And so those verses some way are doing the same thing to sort of reflect the mission of which you and I are both saying the same thing, or both their names are Danielle.
Yes.
Both our parents.
Daniel judges nation like one of the tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
Is that the one you say?
So it's almost like we have this, both our parents lost their free will to some degree. Hashem wanted that to be our name. We both have some type of similar mission in this world based off the fact that we share that name. So is there more to that, the reason we read those biblical verses that represent our name?
As anything, there's a lot of layers to it. One is reading a pasuk from the Torah that represents us, helps us identify. A verse from the Torah helps us identify with what our mission is and reminds us, as we do reading various verses from the Torah. The idea that words and names have spiritual significance is so common. It's almost hard to know where to begin with this. It begins with creation, actually. You have Adam Arishon, Adam, who's given the job of assigning names to animals. It's an amazing story in the Medrash, and the angels can't do it. They're unable to. Why is it so hard? You call the table a table and a dog a dog. Yeah. Call it whatever you want. But in Hebrew, we're told this is the building block of this is the language with which God created the world. It doesn't say, throughout the whole creation story, it doesn't say God made this or God made that. It says God says this. And the speech, as you brought from other podcasts, the speech is the creation. It's the assigning of how things will be manifest. To the point where it described in Kabbalah where the sound of speech, people's speech, and by extension, how God manifests, is there's the sound, and then there are consonants which cut up that sound into shapes, into words, and into syllables. And the sound itself is assigned to chesed, which means expansion. It's about putting out. Whereas the consonants, and there's 5 categories, represent the 5 gevuros in the Kabbalah, represent gevura, which is limits, which is a common theme throughout Kabbalah and throughout Hasidus, that you have or and kalim. You've got energy and you have vessels or limits. And it's always a balance between those two things. And you find that throughout. And so the creation story is Hashem saying, let there be this. After all of that, you have Adam Rishon, who's given the task of naming animals. And he names all the animals, and it's supposed to be an amazing accomplishment. So we're told it's an accomplishment because he was so in touch with the spiritual flow of energy into the world that he could understand the tendencies, the purpose, the mission of each animal by a small example. The word for dog in Hebrew is kelev. Kelev is seen, according to Chassidus, as an acronym or a shortening of kol lev, kulei lev. It's all heart. Where the idealized human is mind over heart, intellect over emotion, and figuring out how to channel this animal that we have, which is important, into doing good things, but all through the lens of intellect. On the other hand, animals are not like that. In particular, dogs are such great friends. They're either excited, they're attacking, they're hungry, they're in the mood, they're doing something. It's all heart. It's not a good look for a human. But that's the essence of a dog, a kelev. In the book of Sefer Yetzirah, that initial, it describes the math almost behind how many combinations of letters can create things. And it says letters are bricks and the words are houses. And with 2 bricks, you can make 2 houses. And with 3 bricks, you can make 6 houses. And 4 bricks, make 24 houses. 520. Now, what's the math there? It's factorial, And that's every possible combination. That's why, in the way things are manifest, sometimes we can see it in the word, and sometimes you only have a little remnant of that similarity between 2 words is just remnant in the number. It's called the gematria of 2 words. You might have the same number, and that is symbolic to us. It doesn't mean that I can anyone can come up with 2 words that have the same gematria, and it doesn't mean it has value. But when a holy person who can see in the dark, as it were, and whereas we're groping around in the dark, but when it's tzaddik or a rebbe or somebody says, this is the meaning of that, that's why they have the same gematria, or the gematria of this is that. We have it from ancient or inspired sources. It helps give a glimpse about the meaning of words.
I think that's where I originally sort of got exposed to this idea of the power of the letters. And you're right, their numbers as well. Is I did study Sefer Yetzirah like 4 or 5 years ago. Now, keep in mind, the reason I tackled it over Sukkot was I read that if you struggle with the text, but you don't get it, which I didn't get it, but when Mashiach comes and the light's more revealed from Hashem, then you'll totally understand it. So I'm just letting everyone know I'm going to do a full podcast on Sefer Yetzirah when Mashiach comes and total clarity on it.
You'll be ahead of most of us, just for me.
Just for the fact that I struggled with it, but I didn't get it. But I do remember, like when I was reading it and all the commentary by Rabbi Cotlar was that they knew how to go into that, I guess, that conscious level of Yetzirah and change the letters. And these rabbis, they would create a calf to slaughter for Shabbos.
Stories that are not from obscure Kabbalistic sources. These are straight from the Talmud. And the Talmud is a legal text. And it has stories in there, but it has stories like that, right? Creating a calf, creating of a golem. The initial golem story is from the Talmud. It's from Rabbah and Rav Zera. And a creation of something through words and letters. We're told that when Moshe has to save the slave's life who's getting beaten up by the Egyptian, he kills the Egyptian with the name of God.
Amazing. So the letters are the code. So the other thing about all this too is when you look at the different names of Hashem. So there's all these different names that are used to reflect his interaction with the world, which on one level teaches us that what really defines us is our interactions with the world. You can't see Hashem, can't hear, but what defines him is the way he interacts with us with loving kindness and balance with Gevurah in order to create the right type of compassion. And it really sort of like then what in the end defines us is not what we see in the mirror, but how Hashem sees our actions, how others see our actions. But talk a little bit about that too. I'm sure there's a lot more insights too on the various names of Hashem used in the Torah.
Indeed. And we just came from Purim, where you have an entire book without the name of Hashem in it, and which gets to this dichotomy between a name as a helpful label and a name as a limiting restriction. And we use names. This is just a little philosophical about it. I mean, we use labels and names because it helps save time and it helps identify. You can see you give a baby a cup and they can just be transfixed and amazed by it for a while and turning it around. You give it to somebody, yeah, it's a cup, thanks. And that's it. Well, we use that name, so now we can, if we want to manufacture cups, we can just say cup and we can make a bunch of them. If you want to pass me the cup, and it's good. That's why we have a name for cup. Now that's good. And the problem is we do it for people too. And we that's the person who XYZ, we do it for, and then we do it for behaviors, and we type things to the point where they're now just rinse and repeat, and they're templatized, and it's very limiting. When we get a text, you have an immediate reaction from somebody. Oh, this is from somebody. This. Well, how do you know what they had in mind? And so we do it to Hashem also, right? God interacts with the world, and we can't relate to something without a name. The name is the interface with which we can relate, and so throughout the Torah, we have names of Hashem. Sometimes, though, we just say, God says, I. In the Ten Commandments, he says, I. He doesn't say, it says, Anochi, I am. And then in the case of the book of the Megillah, I was referencing the book of Esther, HaMelech, the king. But he doesn't say any one of the names. It's just hidden because it's, in a way, it's less limiting when referring to God himself. A child's ability to believe in God as opposed to a complex, complicated, overcomplicated, the way that we can sometimes overcomplicate things. So we have to somehow strive for the understanding and the wisdom of understanding of these names, which we can talk about, but at the same time rise above them to almost to a child's purity, like praying like a child, just to be open. An infinite God who's, as we know, God is not these names. These are names that are just like we described ourselves. Our name is the interface between the soul and the body. When we describe names of God, that's an interface. That is a method. That's a way that God interacts with the world.
Right. It's one minute vantage point for that situation, but that doesn't encompass obviously
the infinite. How can you? It's infinite layers of infinity, and even that pales. So there's a story in the Medrash that introduces that to me the idea of names of God. And your podcast is called the Shema podcast, and Shema Yisrael is the most fundamental and foundational of all the prayers. Where is Shema in the Torah? It's brought in I think in the book of Devarim. Moshe Rabbeinu teaches Shema before the Jews went into Israel. Okay. That every day they should say Shema to remember how they're the unity of God. However, it's the line Shema Yisrael does appear before then chronologically, not in the written Torah, but the Medrash brings stories of Shema before that. Right.
Yaakov, when he meets Yosef.
Exactly. Okay. I thought you were going to go with Yaakov and his children, which is the first thing my mind goes is to when they're all around his deathbed, and they reassure him, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, God is one, don't worry, we believe. And he says, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusay Le'Lavad. But there's an earlier, like you brought up, you got straight to the beginning. The first mention, as I understand it, of Shema Yisrael is in the Medrash when Yaakov is meeting Yosef. And we're told that after 17 years of suffering and wondering about his child, he finally meets him, and he's overwhelmed. And Yosef is meeting his father, he's crying with emotion. Yaakov is saying Shema. And what is the meaning of that? So it's explained in Chassidus that he's saying Shema Yisrael to himself. Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. These names of God, I thought I understood. I thought I knew that there was Hashem, that's spelled Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, as you described. We can call it, by the way, that's called Havaya. It's often pronounced Havaya in shorthand in Chassidus. They refer to that name. It's the switching of the letters, so you're not pronouncing it properly. So Havaya and Elokim, Elokeinu. So Shema Yisrael, Havaya Elokeinu, Havaya Echad. I used to think that they were separate modes of interaction of the world. There was the infinite kind. There was when we understood things. There was when things are going well and kindness brought down into the world of Havaya. And then there was the strict judgmental Gevura of Elokim. And I've been treated with Elokim for a long time. And they were separate. Like God could choose to act in this way or that way. Yaakov had this deep realization that it's all really one. He saw that this separation was in service of a good. It was in service of feeding the whole family, of creating a destiny, a future for the entire Jewish people. And so all of this hardship, he's seeing it now through the lens of the unity of God, Havaya and Elokeinu.
What seemed like severity was actually the kindness, except you can't sometimes...
You have to zoom way out.
You have to zoom out.
Maybe even more than one lifetime sometimes.
Right, yeah.
But certainly not in TikTok time. We're not going to be able to see it. Those are the two fundamental... It says Hashem Elokeinu is like the sun and a shield. The two most prototypical names of God as described. But there's 7 described in the Talmud that have a special classification that you're not supposed to erase them if they're written. Whereas in many cases, God is described as kind or as fighting a war for us or all of these things, Chanan, Rachum, Tamim. However, those can be erased. It's the 7 names, special names of Hashem, which are generally a manifestation of God in a particular way, in a particular channel. The Kabbalists would talk about the world of Atzilus. Atzilus being the top world, where the basic ideas of differentiation, where you have these idea of the 10 Sefirot, the 10 powers that create the world, of which there are 3 intellectual, or which means processing, and 7 emotional, or meaning interaction with the outside. This is the DNA of our soul, and it's also the DNA of how God interacts with the world. And these names of God typically line up to one of those. But the most infinite of the name that is, let's say, in one way generic for God, and most infinite, it's if you imagine water flowing through channels, through pathways, maybe colored or different pathways, but the water inside is the infinity powering kindness, or the infinity powering infinite kindness, right? Infinity powering infinite ability to have gevura, to limit and to hide oneself. So that's why the inside name of all names of God is this Yudke, is Havaya. The revelation of infinity, as you described, that the rabbi told you, it's the thought manifest, right? Or not, I would say the way I think about it is the revelation of infinity. Pathway down from infinite to revealed. And that's why in the story of Egypt, Moshe goes to Paro, and Paro says, we all believe in God or gods, but who is this Hashem, Havaya, that I should listen to him? I don't believe in an infinite God is all powerful. That I can't get.
Yeah, and I also read that in some commentary that the God that the first and second Pharaoh believed in was the element God that created the world. What hardened their heart was this idea that there was a God that orchestrated every event, and there was reward and punishment, and we were responsible for our actions. That it was that aspect of God that hardened his heart that they couldn't comprehend or want to comprehend.
Yeah, it's easy to look on the outside. We're all a little like that, I guess, in some way, more or less. We obviously believe, but does our behavior belie a certain failure to internalize the fact that God is really running everything at all times, right now? So yeah, of course, there's God. He created the world. And the Tanya describes the view of philosophers that God created something and then left it to various forces of nature. And in the old times, they would believe this were forces of astrology, or but today, nature, there's the markets, there's things work, they're put in play. Okay, once in a while, big things. Okay, you got a act of Congress. Maybe God will get involved.
My litmus test I like to give myself to keep myself in check, how much I recognize that, is when you're not feeling well, you have a headache, what's my first thought? Is it, Hashem, will you heal this? Will you guide me to the doctor that will heal it? Or is it immediately going to the medicine cabinet? Is the medicine healing me, or is it Hashem healing me?
Oh man, now you're giving me a really guilty conscience.
But that's like our, the reason we say the Shema, in the morning and at night is to remind ourselves that. But during the day, I forget that, and I'm always trying to force a business deal to be closed. Mm-hmm. And the things like, it's really like, who's really controlling this?
In this parsha we just passed, they list all the animals, the kosher ones and the not kosher ones, and one of them is called a shalach, and it means it's the animal. It's a bird that swoops down into the ocean and picks up fish. I guess that's a stork, pelican. So the Talmud says that it's called that because it means swoop, and then it goes and tells a story that it brings a verse from the Torah, and I think Rabbi Yochanan says this is proof that this is God's wisdom is even in the depths of the ocean, that choosing which fish are going to have to go today. And that's sitting in the Talmud for a couple thousand years, but then in more modern times, the Baal Shem Tov and describes hashgacha pratis, which means specific guidance from God. A God is an ever-present and ever-involved God, which wasn't, people had trouble connecting with that in a detailed way. He would make illustrations to his students about even a leaf falling is directed by God in order to do, and he would show them, they would, look, it fell on this animal that needed a bug that needed shade, the tiniest thing of all things. And I was like, how can God pay attention to all that at one time? Well, it's good to be infinite,
right? And that's what we say in Ashrei too, right?
Yeah.
Which translate that for the audience?
Open your hand and give life to all living things.
Right. So he provides food. He provides everything to all living things.
Yeah, and so the Baal Shem Tov used that as a proof, even from the Talmud. It's not, God doesn't only pay attention to big things, not even only to humanity, even animals. Which fish is going to go that day? Elokim would be like the shield, the shield on the energy, because infinite energy is destructive, and more specifically, you wouldn't have a world without this limit. An infinite power for God to hide and create give us a chance to have individual identity and think that we're independent. In the words of Kabbalah, it's called tzimtzum, contraction, hiding, and then you have Kale, which represents chesed, kindness, power, and then Adnai, we'd say, which represents Malchus, the rulership of God present in the world, as we've just been describing,
right?
And other names.
Because we go back and forth in our liturgy, our Father, our King. We're constantly shifting between these two different ways in which we view God, correct? And I think we're supposed to be keeping both those ideas in mind at all time. Is that accurate? Because I always get confused. Like, do you want me to approach you as King or my Father? I prefer Father, but I know there's some times of the year where I just know that I'm the subject and he's the king. Come Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But I know leading up to Rosh Hashanah, then they say the king's in the field. That's your last chance to talk to your Father before he sits in the palace and passes judgment. But it seems like, he's always in both those things. I've always
think about infinity as it can be a lot of things, and right. it depends on how we connect to the infinite.
Right.
The truth is, it's both, and it depends on who you are and where you are in your life.
Right. It's fear and love, isn't it?
Yes, and it's there are amazing holy people who in this world are, we say, Avinu, God being our Father. It's not just a psychological metaphor that he's really close to us. It's more than that. It's we are the kind of we have an infinite soul, and we are the reflection of godliness in this world. So we are children of God, and most of us are not in that space at all times, at many times. We don't act like it. We don't think like it. And so Malkeinu, a king, that's a more accessible relationship, because that is something, all right, I get it. I have to do it. I'm going to do it. But it's certainly better. It's higher. This close relationship of a father and a child, parent and a child, is a higher level. And great tzaddikim would have both. But they in this world, they would still be able to relate as a child, not just as a subject.
And I think there's points in my life too where I know I need to be pushing myself a little more. And a forgiving father, that relationship is not going to cause me to push myself. You have to think long game, like when I'm standing before the Almighty. Sometimes I need to approach it like He's my King, and I need to be pushing myself more to do A, B, and C, so I can have the closeness of a father and son. So you're right. I sort of go back and forth on what's more appropriate for me in that moment. Sometimes when you're struggling, I just want to approach Him as a father. I think that's what He wants to convey to us too.
That's a really great insight. The last name of the 7 names of Hashem to be revealed in the Torah was not in the Torah at all. It's in the later parts of the later books. It's in the Tanakh.
Okay.
In the Nach, particularly. So the name Tzvakos, we say, but it's spelled with an aleph, is that Lord of hosts. We find it all over the Tanakh. Who invents it? Who discovers it? Who kind of writes that pathway in, or sees God in that way, is Chana. And on Yom Kippur, we read the story of Chana, and it's about her praying and associating and relating to God on a much more accessible, lower way than I think, as you'd see it. Moshe was so lofty that he was connected to God in the higher spiritual worlds, and he was describing Hashem's energy at that level, which became over the ages harder and harder to do and less accessible. And the Talmud says, from the day God created the world, no one called God Tzvakos until Chana came, and she did it. And it was the ability to see that even down here in this world, the most mundane things, God's not something outside of the world. It's all, God is within everything. Even the host, which means the multitude, a plurality of differentiation and what appears to be a fragmented, disparate, and unconnected, without any purpose, and sometimes everything is just specks and atoms and protons and neutrons in that disparate world, seeing God's hand. And so it's the lowest name of God, which is meaning, but the most applied.
What does that word mean? Lord of hosts is a translation when I'm reading the English in my sitter.
Present in physical, present in the physical, present in the darkest times.
Gotcha.
And there's a version of that same word when the Jews are leaving Egypt. It says Tzivos Hashem, the army of the hosts of God. We're called an army leaving. It's also said in the Talmud that there's a few meanings of that word Tzivos. Tzivos means army, troops. It also means like almost like the colors. Because we are not one, we're not supposed to be monochromatic. The Torah gives us a lot of latitude about finding our own pathway, especially within prayer and within what we do in life, within halacha, within keeping the commandments and being a good person. But we're not supposed to be all just penguins.
Right.
Exactly the same.
Not to be robots.
So this Tzavos is about the uniqueness of every single person. And so the menorah and the temple at 7 branches are representing the 7 categories or different categories of Jewish people. I find it interesting that a rainbow has like 7 colors, or at least the way they categorize it. So that's one of the other explanations. So it's the later prophets, starting from Chana, who are able to help us see the godliness within the world.
Beautiful. What about the angels have specific missions, and these angels have names, correct? Based off their specific missions, is that something you can speak to? Because I remember there was something about the 3 angels that came to visit Avraham after he gave himself bris milah, and there was one that was on its way to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy it. There was one that was there to heal him. There was something, from what I recall, you can probably clarify, that one couldn't do another task. It was like, because of the name they have. Is there's something to that?
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. There's a Haftorah where a Navi says, God, you have placed me as somebody who walks among all those who stand. Imagine a room where a bunch of people are standing around and one person's progressing, walking. And that was him in heaven with a soul versus an angel. An angel doesn't progress. An angel is, in modern days terminology, I would say a program, a very good program, a very spiritual, lofty, not software, but whatever spiritual version of that. But what makes humans different, Adam ala elyon, Adam called himself Adam meaning I am similar to above, to the way God interacts with the world, is it's the complete partsuf, or complete range and balance of this entire possibility, a range of emotion and intellect in the form of infinity, but realized within a bunch of details that can work in concert with each other. So we have the ability to change, to progress, to grow, and that is what makes people different than angels, and souls different than angel. An angel has a mission, and when its success is to be reabsorbed into the great oneness of everything. And in fact, there's a line we say in davening, we say, Yotzer Misharsim v'Asher Misharsav, those who are created and those who've been created. There's actually categories of angels that just are like disposable cups that are like single use, and they do a thing and then they are reabsorbed into the oneness. And then there's ones that are made more lofty and permanent, that have a mission that is perpetual, but it's still within a very narrow range. It's in a range. We are told that, Michael is angel of kindness, and Gavriel is the angel of severity and judgment. Okay. Rafal, healing. And so an angel has these are tools. These are not gods. These are tools. They're spiritual, and spiritual doesn't mean God. It means it's pre-physical. So it's spiritual tools of God and identities in so far as imagine a very complicated, very amazing program that is the methods by which God has chosen to interact with things in the world.
They're there to facilitate his interacting. It's a way for the infinite to interact with the finite is through facilitation of these spiritual beings.
Yeah, and in Kabbalah, you would have, it describes worlds, the four worlds, and there's powers within the world, and also in Kabbalah it says very careful, you're not praying to these powers, you're seeing the godliness present in the powers. Even the way that the detailed way that God interacts with the world is said to be through names. So this Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey Havaya has 24 combinations for each hour of the day. When Rabbi Shneur Zalman Avdi was in jail in Russia, they tried to confuse him by having lights on at weird hours, and he always knew exactly what time it was. He said, "I know what it is. It's 2:30." He said, "How do you know?" He says, "Every hour there's a particular unique combination of God's energy coming into the world. So if you can see it, then you know what time it is." I heard a story about the Husiatana Rebbe, which he lived in the earlier part of the 1900s, and up to the 1940s, there was a lot of fear and panic that the Nazis were going to invade, actually make it into Israel. And he was telling people to visit the gravesite of the holy Or HaChaim and to build mikvahs as a protection. And then at one point, they were maybe 2 hours away. It was very close. And he said, he looked into the distance and he says, "We're going to be fine." And they asked, "How did you know it?" And he saw the letters of Hashem coming in the right order down, that there would be at least this amount of order and hierarchy and purpose and correctness in the world. It wouldn't be as dark as the Nazis into Israel. The people who are highly sensitive can see the names can see the pathways and can see Hashem, combinations of energy coming into the world, can see it in people, and that's why they can help people, guide. There was a Kabbalist in Israel who advised a relative of mine to change her name after a car accident, and she did.
What was her name? Was it what?
Her name was Orly, my light, and she changed. He told her to not only add a name but change her name to Noah, and so she did, and she recovered. But the point is just that holy people can see this, and we're lucky if we get a glimpse of it. But I think studying the ideas and studying the concepts as you said about Sefer Yetzirah, it gives you a familiarity that does create a structure and a framework you can start building scaffolding around in your head and building a story and understanding it more and more. Ultimately, we're never going to get to a perfect understanding, but we do get better. We can see with more clarity, and it can affect our behavior. The Medrash tells about how our soul, before it enters the body, is taught the entire Torah, and then is given a little jolt by an angel and forgets everything, comes out. So then what's the point of that? That sounds tragic. The point of it is that there's a familiarity and a recollection. And the first time you study something in Kabbalah or Hasidus, it sounds just, obscure, strange, fantastic. And then you can, but then I think that's probably true for a lot of things: physics, math, chemistry,
right?
And
any new concept.
And diving into it more is worthwhile. It gives you a familiarity. Familiarity breeds an understanding, which then ultimately, which is the purpose of it all, makes us feel differently and affects our behavior.
Beautiful. And I think there's the reason I think this concept has some real tangible weight to it in our lives is not just some theoretical ideas, because it shows the gravity of our responsibility. With speech, there's a lot of things like, we were sort of drawing on this parallel of technology, which again, the sages, over 100 years ago were saying we would have innovation that would help us understand the world. And, I've heard an analogy given this world. It's like what we would see a website today with this beautiful interface, but behind it all is code. These ideas, knowing the reality of this, what's behind the website screen, that we are influencing it by our words, and our name does give us a sense of our mission, that we do have a mission here, we do have a purpose, and we have this lofty responsibility of being Hashem's co-creator and to take it all seriously.
We matter, and we matter a lot.
Yes.
This is the why. We are the why for the whole thing.
Right.
Which is, it's both humbling, but it gives us a tremendous amount of importance and responsibility. This is why God did things, is so that we have a world and we can make a beautiful world and make God present here. There's something in Pirkei Avot that says, Da ma'ala ma'ala mimach, know what's above you. And the Maggid of Mezrich says, he puts a comma in a different place, and he says, Da ma'ala ma'ala mimach, know that everything above is from you. So if I made it sound like we're the shadow on the wall, and that there's really physical objects that are making the shadow, we're at the bottom of a devolution from spiritual to physical, know that it actually, the purpose of which is to go upwards. And everything, all the spiritual worlds, they hang on the smallest thing we do. And so yes, we're like, there's a downward energy that's the creative of this world and making things happen. But what we do as a result of that is tremendous and impactful, and it's the importance. It's why God did it all.
That's beautiful. The other night, I was sitting on the back patio. I was having my scotch, a little stogie, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do the last hour of my day? I could watch some rubbish on Netflix. I should probably go, watch a shir on YouTube or something. And I was going to go over the Netflix route, and I was just stopping. I was looking out the clear sky. It's so vast. You think about the vastness of this universe, and I just had this idea, this entire vast universe, he created it for us to serve his will. Like, it serves no other purpose except for us, for each of us. And it calls me to watch the shir versus the nonsense on Netflix. But I'm just saying, everyone listening should know that. Like, when you just look out at the world, it was only created as a setting for each of us to fulfill his will here, to fulfill our mission. Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking donate in the top right corner of the page. And if you would like to get in contact with our host with comments, suggestions for future topics of learning, or questions for him or his guest rabbis, you may email him at president@torchweb.org.